Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome in to our latest TDR Trade to Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales, going solo today as Mr. Varel is on a flight heading out to Western Canada for July 4th. Hey, it's Canada, but why not celebrate Independence Day by heading up to Canada? You'll have to ask him those questions. But why are we here today? I call it Law Firm Wednesday. A lot of rumors, as we all know, have been circulating in this industry over the last couple of days. We want to squash some of these rumors and bring in one of the best thought leaders, one of the best attorneys in cannabis law, Eric Berlin from Denton. So with that, court is now in session. It is Wednesday, so let's welcome in, like I said, one of the best thought leaders in the cannabis space, Eric Berlin from Dentons. I think we're having some technical difficulties. 1 second. We're trying to bring him up. We're going to have him up in a second, but like I said, everybody, we want to obviously squash a lot of these rumors right now pertaining to obviously rescheduling, the Chevron Defence, and whether or not this will apply moving forward. 1 second. I think he's coming on in just a minute. So he brings him up. Maybe Arns, bring him on up if you've got a chance. I think his screen is on black. Eric, can you hear me by chance?
I can. I'm not sure what the problem is. Bear with me for 1 moment. Can you?
I can hear you loud and clear. But yeah, maybe just see if your camera can get up to speed. But lots to talk about and dive into today. I'm sure that a lot of you people, like I said before, have been worried about what's going to happen, obviously, moving forward. And, most importantly, I think, the most important thing here is just getting on the same page. But trying to see if Eric is going to come on again. If he can't, then I think we might bring in Darren Weiss from Verano momentarily, if possible. You know what? Let's bring in Darren Weiss, Arns, as we wait to hear. I don't know what's going on with Eric. Good to see you. How are things?
Hey, doing great, Chad. How are you?
Good. I know that we were planning to have you on just after Eric. We'll bring him up momentarily, going through some technical difficulties. But I will start with you. And, let's face it, a lot of rumors swirling around right now. And I think a lot of people, they know you. You're president, you're an executive at a multi-state operating cannabis company, but I think maybe a lot of people don't realize that you're also a lawyer. So is there any concerns that you have whatsoever pertaining to this topic over the past 48 hours?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me, Chad. And if you, I'll apologize for my hair sticking on end because I've been literally pulling it while I'm reading some of these comments that are coming out online with regards to the liberal right case and the way in which folks are interpreting this. So look, big picture, I think Shane Pennington maybe said it best when he said that the rumors of the death of rescheduling are greatly exaggerated. The case, although an important case as it relates to administrative law jurisprudence, which I have some background in, which I can talk about as well. It's an important case. The impact on the rescheduling efforts is quite minimal, and in fact, it can be helpful both with the current rescheduling and as it relates to additional challenges to the extent we hit a Schedule 3 or otherwise. This is a very, very complex and complicated area of law that deals with constitutional law, statutory construction. I will tell you, so I wrote a law review article. For those of you not familiar, law review is sort of the vogue for lawyers, so to speak. I wrote a law review article about 15 years ago on Chevron Defence. If you told me that I'd be sitting here 15 years later talking on a show like this about Chevron Defence, I would have laughed you right out of the studio.
Well, here we are.
But here we are, right? Yeah, for sure. So look, I mean, big picture, and I'm a lawyer, but I'm a recovering lawyer. I do a lot more on the business side now. So Eric Berlin, once we're able to get a connection going, can certainly
he's actually as well as he's available right now. Let's bring him up right now. Let's keep you in. But I think it's important. Eric, good to see you. How are things?
Good to see you. Good to see both of you. Apologies for the technological issue, but it's nice to see you, Shad and Darren. Nice to see you as well.
Great to see you.
And eager to talk about this subject with you all.
Yeah, it's like, I can't think of a better thing to do leading into a long weekend on July 4th. We're talking about this at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right?
Right.
There you go.
I'm game.
Well, listen, a lot of fireworks going to be taking place around the country tomorrow on July 4th, but we all know in this cannabis space, we've seen some fireworks take on early on here in the past 36 hours, which is related to this Chevron Defence and whether or not it will have any impact on the pending rescheduling of cannabis. So we originally were speculating that cannabis would be rescheduled. I think a lot of people were anticipating like sometime like, late summer, early fall. So Eric, we've seen and read several takes on how this could impact the 5-step process with the HHS and the 2-step process that the OLC memo validated towards rescheduling. So first up, I think is the most important thing, and I want to get this out of the way. With this new ruling that took place, in your opinion, does this have any kind of impact on cannabis being rescheduled? Yes or no?
I would say no, not on the actual process. It may provide some fodder for folks who are already going to try to file litigation, but I don't think it really helps them either. So I think it has maybe a minimal material effect, and I'm happy to explain why.
Can you explain why?
Yeah, sure. So let's be clear as to what the Loper decision did, first of all, and that is the very recent Supreme Court decision overruling the Chevron deference, which has been in place for decades. And it's Loper Bright Enterprises is the name of the case. And what the Supreme Court said is that courts have to exercise their independent judgment to determine whether an agency acted within its statutory authority.
Okay.
And so that's one step. Here, there's no question that the Attorney General, on the advice of HHS, may reschedule cannabis.
Okay.
That's very clear in the statute. There's no ambiguity. Chevron wouldn't have applied to that anyway. The second part is that the courts need not defer to an agency's interpretation of the law, regardless of that ambiguity. That is under the Administrative Procedures Act. And I'm sure that Darren discussed it in his law review article. I don't know if I'll go back to read that over Independence Day, but we'll see. But I think it has really no material impact on the rescheduling process because of that, right? There's still very clear, I want to say, there's still deference to the factual determinations. And that's previous Supreme Court law, Morton Salt and Skidmore. And there really is no question that that is still in place. And in fact, I want to just, and I won't read a lot, but turn to the opinion itself. And in the opinion, they're saying, as relevant here, the APA, Administrative Procedures Act, specifies the courts, not agencies, will determine all relevant questions of law arising from review of agency action. It goes on to say, however, that the deference to facts remains in place. An agency's interpretation of a statute cannot bind a court, but may be especially informative to the extent it rests on factual premises. That's even giving permission there, but that's not even what we have here. What we have here, and it's not finished yet, but based on what the FDA's recommendation was, is the FDA taking action which is clearly within the statutory authority, giving this recommendation to the Attorney General and the DEA within the Department of Justice. There's no question there's statutory authority for that. What the FDA then did was make a factually based determination as to whether certain regulatory standards were met. That is not something that gets into Chevron deference to begin with. So the folks who are out there saying this torpedoes rescheduling, this cancels rescheduling, this changes the process entirely, I respectfully don't agree with those positions. I think this doesn't make much of a material change on the actual rescheduling process.
Well, we are in a stage right now where rescheduling is very political. And if you give these anti-legalization groups an inch, they're obviously going to take a mile, correct?
I think that they are going to try to, first of all, let's be clear as to what's going on here. The answer to your question is yes. But what the groups opposed to rescheduling are doing is trying to delay as much as they can, hoping that this gets into a Trump administration. They feel they have a better chance. Kevin Sabet's organization asked for 30 additional days to provide a comment. I mean, they've been working on this for years. They don't need an additional 30 days to provide a comment.
Do you think they
asked
get
for
it?
a hearing. I don't think any of them have standing to ask for a hearing. And so I think that I haven't seen any party that has standing to ask for a hearing at this point. You have to be an interested party, which means not that you're just have interest as a citizen. You have to be potentially adversely affected by the result. And that's true for any litigation that would apply.
Yeah.
So this conversation, I think, has nothing, at least very little, to do with the actual rescheduling process. It would only potentially impact litigation that occurs afterward, that's filed in the court, that asks the court to consider what the executive agencies have done. And I don't think Kevin Sabet or Sams has standing to even file that case. Anyone can file, but they don't have standing to actually bring the case. And what's relied on, and even the request for hearing, is, oh, we're going to have to spend more money to counter this. That's not standing. You have to actually be adversely impacted, and that's something that we lawyers have. You know, it's debated a lot it's argued as to whether someone is adversely impacted, but I don't see here how any of those organizations are. Or quite frankly, you know, some of the other folks who have sent in comments opposing rescheduling.
Darren, and to be clear, none of that. Yeah, I was just saying, and by the way, none of that has to do with this Loper Wright decision, right? Everything that Eric said with respect to the challenges around the timing of notice and comment, asking for additional time, that is a post rulemaking process. It does not change. It has absolutely no impact on the process that we're very much in the middle of right now, which is notice and comment and consideration of those comments to promulgate final rules, which is the rescheduling itself. This is about, you know, the standard. It's crazy, again, like I said, that we're talking about the standard of review on certain legal conclusions in a post rule court. And so it has no impact on the timeline for rescheduling whatsoever.
Welcome to the media landscape of 2024, where you can say anything and everything online, right? I see that firsthand. But to your original point regarding, like, you know, the Chevron deference, like, from what I understand in so many words, Eric, the courts are still going to have to respect and lean on a lot of the information that a lot of these agencies are providing moving forward, correct?
So that's absolutely correct. And let's be clear here. Not only do the courts need to defer to the factual and scientific findings of the FDA, the DEA does as well. And so those are not legal decisions. It's not legal interpretation of a statute. They were factual determinations according to the 8 factors that are given. And certainly agencies have discretion to interpret how to make a factual finding to meet those 8 factors, which is what the FDA has done. And I think that's not objectionable under old law or current law.
Yeah. Right. And I think did you want to add something, Darren? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask whether it'd be useful to just maybe just to back up a little bit, because I think part of the issue is that there is a lot of confusion, understandably, a lot of confusion about not only the Loper Bright case, but about Chevron and really where it applies and how it applies and what the reason for it is. And it's important, in my view, because of what Eric said, this distinction between facts and scientific conclusions on the one hand, and an interpretation of a statute. Chevron and the Loper Bright case are about the interpretation of a statute. They're not about facts. They're not about medical conclusions or scientific findings. As Eric alluded to, there was a case in 2005, the Gonzalez case, which specifically said that decisions around rescheduling are delegated expressly to HHS, and the Attorney General has to rely on the findings of HHS. So we're talking about a very, very fine point of law here, not something that has exploded this process. And I think it's really important for folks to remember that and understand that.
It's not scientific information, correct? Is what you're basically alluding to.
The findings, and Eric said it's still in process. Obviously, they're taking comments on this, but the HHS recommendation, the documents upon which it relied, which we've seen now, the OLC memo, which we've seen now, the NPRM, which we've seen now, all based on medical findings, on facts, on conclusions of science that are in no way impacted by the Loper-Bright decision.
Right.
Not related at all.
So I think it's important. I think people, what you just outlined, should not jump to conclusions. That's probably the most important fact that I've heard yet. But saying that, moving forward, how is this going to be handled, Eric, moving forward, do you think?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm in strong agreement with what was just said. And I want to add something to it, which is that's absolutely right. The Chevron decision has to do with agency interpretation of its authority under a statute, and that's what this case was about.
Okay,
the plaintiffs came in and said the agency went well beyond what it's entitled to do. And if you look at the FDA's recommendation, and I'm going to just read I think it's just a sentence from the bottom of page 4 and 5, it shows how factual and scientific it is. The present evaluation of marijuana discusses the scientific and medical information relative to each of the 8 factors, presents findings in the 3 required areas: abuse potential, CAMU, commonly accepted medical uses, and safety and dependence liability, and makes a recommendation. I mean, on its face, it's stating that this is factual, scientific, and medical, not the sort of thing that is would be part of Chevron review or affected by Loper, in my opinion.
So,
and I didn't answer your question as to moving forward. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of moving parts here, and it's just like I'm trying to come up with follow-up questions. But I'm sorry, I was hitting a bong in my dorm when I missed that class at law school. But it's like, but I'm trying to drum this down for people to obviously simplify and see this. And I think there's some really compelling information that you shared, Darren, and also Eric, as far as where we're at and the kind of the effects of where we're at right now. But I think most importantly, is there any kind of information that could, I guess, hinder the outlook of rescheduling based on what's this overruling taking place moving forward? How do you see this, I guess, being handled with now that we're in this post-Chevron era?
So I'll take a shot at that, which is, first of all, this discussion is premised on that there will be a rescheduling, and we can talk about that, but we would have to see what the DEA actually says if there's not a rescheduling. And I think given the dominant evidence in the well-reasoned FDA opinion, there could be an issue that relates to Chevron if the DEA acts beyond their authority and doesn't reschedule. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a potential issue there that folks who want rescheduling and want the DEA to follow the recommendation of the FDA, might be in a position to, and particularly folks who want to research and would be negatively harmed by the FDA, by the DEA not permitting this change. So they might have standing and they might bring this argument. But on the assumption that we're going to have rescheduling, first of all, I don't know any of those folks have standing to bring a case to begin with. But let's say they get beyond that and bring a case and have a case. I think the way that they would try to wedge in Loper is to say, well, the FDA didn't really use all the right tests, right? I mean, the court at some point, a court.
Do you think they have something there?
No.
No? Okay.
I don't. I'm just saying that because I think that's what they're broadcasting now, and I'm trying to educate folks, but I think it's garbage. I mean, this is clearly based on well-reasoned well-authorized scientific and medical findings.
Yeah.
That's what this is about, all within statutory authority.
Yeah.
I mean, no one could, honestly, I think to go into court and say that this is beyond the statutory authority, I mean, I think you get sanctioned with that argument.
I see you nodding your head.
There's statutory authority for this. So the best they're going to do is to try to push this into some legal issue and say, well, the standard that they used is a quasi-legal issue and they shouldn't have used that standard. They should have used this other standard. And I think that's
well, the light went off.
Might be able to do, and I think it's feckless.
I think that the light went off what you said earlier. They're just trying to delay the process to get the Trump administration in to look at things differently. But like you said, do you think they get that extended window? Darren, I saw you nodding your head and agreeing with a lot of what Eric just said. You want to maybe elaborate on what he has mentioned and why you're agreeing?
Yeah, I mean, look, so a couple of things. Number one, I think it's also important to contextualize. Had we gotten this decision 1 year ago today, we would all be in the streets cheering. And the reason for that is the Chevron has been used in many ways, and in particular in this way, by this DEA as a way of stopping rescheduling. And just to simplify it, basically, they put this test together and they said, this is the test that has to be met in order to determine that there's an accepted medical use for cannabis. And they made a test that cannabis can't possibly meet because one of the things they looked at was FDA approval. Okay. And of course, we can't have FDA approval because you can't have research and yada, yada, yada. In this case, by doing away with Chevron, they created an avenue by which that test could be challenged.
Yep.
And now they've chosen a test, a two-part test that they've done instead through this process that is much closer to the statute, to the language of the statute. And I think that this is one of the things that gets overlooked, just how masterful this process has been, even though it has seemed slow at times. The steps that they've taken to really make this bulletproof, as bulletproof as they can, moving forward. So, the folks who say, the antis are going to use anything that they can to try to throw a wrench in this process. Guess what? This is not that thing. This case is not it. They've got to keep looking. This is not going to give them the avenue that they want. Yeah.
Well, when you look back at the redactment and a lot of the information that was outlined, you think this is very articulated because this is probably something they assumed would come from anti-legalizations. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think, look, they put this process in place not for it to fail. They put this process in place for it to succeed. And the White House is very committed to having this succeed. They've talked about this on a number of occasions, including, by the way, in the State of the Union, how important this is to them. Their goal is to have this succeed. So they have done everything they can in terms of the HHS recommendation, in terms of using OLC to bat down any potential challenges that may have come up in this in the process with administrative law judges, et cetera, to really make sure that this is as bulletproof as possible. Even, by the way, with a change in administration, which we could talk about on this show or another show. So I think I don't want to say it's much ado about nothing. I think it's worth talking about and thinking about this case, but I'm not sure how or why this got blown so far out of proportion. We are exactly where we need to be here, and I've had no concerns about this piece of litigation or this opinion having any material impact on getting us to at least to the Schedule 3 process.
Yeah. Well, it's why we have these conversations. I know when I was in Washington a couple months ago with Don Murphy, and he said it's extremely important, I think, for this Biden administration to basically get the younger vote leading into the election. And they have had a lot of comments regarding cannabis, especially at the State of the Union address. So after last week's debate, which now it's all up in the air as to who's going to represent that party, it makes you wonder how much more of a concern it's going to be for them, who's going to be the elected official heading into the election, and if some of these narratives that are being created leading into the federal election on November 5th, if like something like this is extremely important for them, obviously to, I guess, capture the younger vote. But I have to ask, and this is a good question maybe for you, Eric, If you're in the walls of the DEA, what do you think is going through their mind right now? How do you see them handling this moving forward?
Well, clearly there's some in the DEA who are opposed to this.
Of course.
And are dragging their feet and kicking and screaming and conspiring with outside organizations to try to work together to defeat this.
Yeah.
Here's the problem they have, and here's the problem that the opponents have. Let's look at what the FDA's recommendation actually said. I'm going to try to boil it down to about a sentence or two.
Okay.
They said, people like marijuana. It makes you feel good, hungry, and then sleepy. That's basically the medical finding. They then said it has generally accepted medical effects, including for anorexia, appetite, and pain. And its risk of abuse is lower than the highest risky drugs. Like, is there really a human being on earth, a rationally thinking human being, who would disagree with that finding at this point? I mean, is there any? I mean, I understand. Listen, first of all, I understand we're tracking the comments. They're now like 30,000 comments. It has more comments already than the FTC's taking away non-compete agreements. Like, this is something larger than that in American society. It's enormous. And I don't mean to diminish some of the comments from families who have had children that they perceive were harmed by cannabis. But I mean, the science is very clear that that's a muddled area. And I understand how people could perceive it. And I don't mean to, I mean, that's a tragic situation if you have a young person who suffers, but it's not the cannabis that caused that. And so, aside from the folks who have that perspective, everyone can look at the FDA's recommendation. And it's, quite frankly, at this point in our history, a blinding glimpse of the obvious. And anyone who would sit and listen to that, be a judge, jury, or citizens, recognize this at this point.
Yes.
That this is a drug that has useful factors that actually helps people to ameliorate suffering, and doesn't have the dangers that many of the other drugs do. These are all pretty well accepted in our society right now. And it's going to be really hard to convince people that that should be reversed for some, I don't know what reason folks would bring. I mean, we see it in their comments, but none are really legal arguments that would rise to the level of reversing this.
Fox News reported 3 weeks ago that 69% of Americans across the country believe in approving full descheduling, legalization of cannabis. We all know that. The question is that will the government listen to its people and actually make changes? And obviously, as we get to the 11th hour, I think this is all promising, because the topic of this conversation is just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger to the point of no return. Do you not agree with that, Darren?
I agree 100%. I've always said that momentum is important in certain cases for the sake of momentum, and we are moving in the right direction. And by the way, this is not our only shot on goal. I'm involved in the Commerce Clause litigation. We had a big win this week. Our case was dismissed, but it was dismissed precisely for the reasons that we wanted it to be dismissed. The court basically said, the Supreme Court has to decide this. And by the way, I think they need to just give this a special look, because there are some really good arguments here that are made. And so we're going to take this to the judicial branch. We continue to hear, I know you don't like to talk about safe banking. Trust me, I don't either. But we continue to hear and see new legislation introduced. Even if it has no chance of passage, the fact that this is remaining in the headlines, the fact that this is on the White House website, the fact that this was mentioned in the State of the Union, the fact that we've got poll after poll after poll coming out showing really overwhelming support. Can you think, Chad, of any issue in the United States that we've got 70% agreement on? Because I sure as hell can.
It's a good point.
So this is all moving in our direction. And not to mention, by the way, the demographic trends. This really is not a partisan issue. This is a demographic issue as it relates to age, for the most part. frankly, although it's happening a little slowly more slowly than we want, getting some of these older guys out of positions of power. Maybe the last 2 weeks, particularly relevant there. That's going to happen as well. And so this is all moving towards greater liberalization of cannabis policy, towards more ubiquity of cannabis products, towards more acceptance of cannabis as part of our social fabric. And this is right where we need to be. And I just hope that folks, invariably there are going to be ups and downs through this process. There are going to be comments or things that are made, statements made by folks within and without of an administration that may seem detrimental to the space. But you have to look at the long arc here of history, and we've made incredible progress in a relatively short period of time for such an important issue.
Yeah. For those just jumping in, this is the TDR Trade Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Call this the People's Court here today. Eric Berlin from Dentons, along with the president of Verano Holdings, Darren Weiss, joining us as we're talking about the Chevron Defence and some of the implications. Does it have any kind of impact? And the clear word right now is no, pertaining to rescheduling. So I wanted to ask you, Eric, if you're sitting in front of a group of anti-legalizations groups, because we all know they're going to contest this ruling, whether it was going to happen or not. What do you think, people should understand? What should we say to them? Maybe it's a question for you, Darren. If you could be in front of these people, what would be the clear message that you would say to them? And I'll start with you first, followed by you, Eric.
So as it relates to rescheduling in particular, something that just gets lost here is that the rescheduling decision is not about whether cannabis will be accessible to Americans. Guess what? It already is. The majority of Americans have access to safe cannabis in their home state. Rescheduling is about creating a program that really, as it relates to the product, has more to do with research and pharmaceutical and drug development than it does with the state of affairs. Cannabis is not going anywhere, regardless of the decision on rescheduling. And people who want to put their heads in the sand and say that, somehow the DEA is the last bastion here of keeping cannabis away from the people are living under a rock. That's just the reality. Whether you like it or not, it's here. I'll add to that. Whether you like it or not, in the places where it does exist, the sky has not fallen. In fact, we've seen all sorts of great things come out, and I'll spare you the details of my soapbox speech here, but we've seen all sorts of great things come to communities and to states, et cetera, and of course, most importantly, to patients who have used the product to alleviate pain and other ailments. And so what I would say to folks who are trying to push against this is I would say we live in a democracy. We live in a place where we believe in fundamental freedom, fairness, and due process.
Yeah, well said.
We have lived over the past 50 years in a cannabis prohibition world that has been counterfactual, counter to the clear body of evidence. It's been counter-majoritarian, counter-democratic in that people want it and they're not getting it. And it's been counter to economic growth. We have 500,000 people employed in the cannabis industry now. No one is shutting this thing down. I don't care, scheduling, descheduling, rescheduling, whatever it is, it's not going anywhere. They better get with the program.
Yeah. We've had Congresswoman Nancy Mace on a few times, and a lot of the data that comes out does not align with somebody's beliefs relating to the space. It's very dated. But when you break down numbers, jobs, and most importantly, the data that shows the approval rate, you're right. It isn't going anywhere. So that's the clear, concise message from you, Darren, that you basically outlined. You have no concerns whatsoever pertaining to the news that came out this week pertaining to whether or not rescheduling happens or not, correct?
With this case, absolutely not. This case gives me no pause.
Okay. All right, Eric, ask you, what can we do you think, as a cannabis industry to, I guess, prepare for some of the noise that the opposition is going to create over these next few days, weeks, and months? What's, I don't want to say you're giving advice, but how would you prepare yourself?
Well, first of all, I want to say that what Darren proposed to say in front of the group of prohibitionists was far more productive than what I would have wanted to say. And one thing I will add to that, prior to answering your question, is that one thing that just confounds me about the prohibitionist approach is it's anti-rule of law.
Yeah.
I mean, these folks would rather let the illicit market proliferate, and they say, oh no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go after them and with the same level of success we've had in the past, right? It's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. And so all of these are steps for implementing the rule of law in an industry. And when you're talking about rescheduling, that's all that's happening here, right? I mean, it's going to help provide for the research that the federal government wants to figure out how do we regulate cannabis going forward. To get better understanding, not of does it have medicinal effects or is it harmful? Those are fairly settled, but like, what impacts is it having on humans as a whole? What do we know about dosing? What do we know about different disease states in taking it? We have an enormous amount of science ahead of us. And I don't know why those folks stand in the way of implementing the rule of law and scientific discovery. And so how we can prepare ourselves is, first of all, having these kinds of conversations, I think, is very important.
100%.
And I think having these and proliferating this correct information is helpful. I think it's helpful for us to remain calm and stay the course. And, you know, I think I can speak for Darren on this one because I know what he's up to, which is, you know, both of us and many others are going to wake up each morning and lace up our boots and get to work on legalizing cannabis. And this hasn't stopped us one bit. And we're going to keep doing that. And I don't think there's anything we need to do. We need to keep doing what we need to do. We need to be a more unified voice in all of this and have
I can't strive on that enough. We as an industry, and I'm not trying to have like we got to come together and support each other more. I find that is extremely important. And when I look at the history back when I used to work in mainstream television, that's the number one thing I saw regarding this space is that get rid of all the noise. And actually, if you have an initiative or an agenda that wants to like progress this industry, all right thinking minds come together, unify, and move forward. And I think that needs to be, as the great Noah Hammond says, let's make rescheduling great again.
So it's so interesting, right? I mean, you see in all of this, if folks just kept their eye on the prize, right, and said, what are we trying to get here? Safe, legal, affordable access for folks who want to use this product, right? And it's not that difficult to get there, right? Except we have all these folks who want to stand in the way, and there's a lot of noise. And I just think it takes work every day. And in terms of a unified voice, if we go more toward that, if we go more toward we're trying to provide safe, legal, affordable access to cannabis and cannabinoids, that provides some clarity versus what's best for my business. And listen, there are a lot of publicly traded companies, including Darren's, and they have a duty to their shareholders, right? And they can't always be idealistic, but I actually think a lot of these are very much overlapping. And you can
100%.
take one position and
Absolutely.
Well, like we said, we shouldn't like let's keep things in a perspective. What are we looking at right now? Adult use is about to go live in Ohio. And obviously with that decision, there's major influence and rumblings about Pennsylvania happening. We have Amendment 3 on election night. That's could make Florida the largest legal cannabis market in the world. And oh, by the way, there's rescheduling. So saying that, moment of truth. Eric, does rescheduling happen before the federal election?
I honestly don't know. I wouldn't want to make a better prediction. It's going to happen, but I don't know whether they get it all done before the federal election. I absolutely think there is a pathway for doing that, but it involves not having a hearing. If there's going to be a hearing, it's not going to get done before the federal election, the presidential election.
Darren, do you care to tackle that question?
I don't. No,
I didn't want to either.
I don't. I as a rule don't make predictions around timing. I don't think it's particularly helpful. I certainly understand the question and why everyone wants to know. Trust me, I want to know too. I'm with Eric though. It is happening. There's no question in my mind, and there's no question in my mind that it's been stacked up in such a way to try to get us there by the election. There's just a lot of wood to chop, and it's okay. This is a complex issue. So like
whether
I said,
whether it's a Biden or Trump administration, this is moving ahead and reiterating kind of like what you said and the confidence that you feel like the train has left the station. This continues to move forward, correct?
Absolutely. And the train is getting faster every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of great feedback here today and a lot of the OGs of this industry. Todd Harrison, good to see you, my friend. Noah Hammond's on here right now. Anthony Varell's about to take off. He's actually in his plane on the tarmac. And Emily Paxia as well. But good to see and a lot of our viewers from every day here that are supporting. I really appreciate all the feedback. But gents, happy Independence Day. Enjoy maybe a day off with your family. And let's keep in touch. But I hope a lot of our viewers got a lot of great information to drum this down and to like really put things into perspective. But you guys both did a great job. So appreciate you checking in and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time, Shad. And anytime you wanna talk turkey, happy to jump on. Eric, great to see you again.
100% we'll do that.
It's a privilege to be on with both of you guys. So thank you very much for the conversation. And I wish you and your audience a happy Independence Day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, gents, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
All right. I hope everybody got some good feedback and information regarding that. I think the key when we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, this side of the law can be very confusing, overwhelming. Wanted to really drum this down to make sure that you, the viewer, can get a better understanding as to what happened, what's good, like currently going on, and most importantly, what's going to happen moving forward. So some good information that's being taken away here. But I think the big thing that we got to focus on too is that the courts are still going to lean heavily on a lot of these agencies moving forward. So a lot of the speculation was that, yes, rescheduling is going to happen. Timing wise, we can't get into that. I asked the question. I wanted to know whether it happens before or after the federal legalization. The reality is, whether it's the Obama administration or the Trump administration, this is indeed going to happen. So what'd you think? Leave some comments below. Let us know your feedback. And, appreciate, obviously, any kind of support that you guys provide as well. Make sure to log on to thedalesreport.com and subscribe to our baked-in newsletter. We've initiated coverage this week on Glasshouse Brands. So if you want to get an inside look as to what we're seeing and what our speculation is moving forward, make sure, as I said, link is in the description or in the comment section here, as well logging on to thedalesreport.com. Also, Friday, kind of up in the air. Should we do a live stream at 11 a.m.? Let me know if a lot of you Americans are off on the holidays and if you'll be around. So let me know if we should do a live stream or check back in on Monday. I pretty much would appreciate your feedback. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for checking out the TDR Trade Black podcast. And we'll get back here either on Friday or Monday. Happy Independence Day, everybody. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. Lots of momentum building. You guys getting all excited? Leave comments below. Again, we want to take this viral. Smash that like button and make sure to click on that bell for all notifications as we start to bring on bigger and bigger guests. Don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, the Baked In newsletter, by logging on to thedalesreport.com. And we want to take this viral, as I said, and make this community grow. So make sure to subscribe on that channel because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everyone, for watching.